So, believe it or not, one of my favorite things to do is to work on giant tax messes. My name is Christina Hageney, and I am president of Valor Payroll Solutions. We help small business owners with their payroll, but I also personally work as a freelance consultant and work with businesses of all sizes, usually related to payroll tax issues. I had the privilege of working on a rather large and fun project that stemmed from a client who was using Gusto for payroll. So, this client went to process some very large bonuses that were intended to be the last payroll of 2023. But on accident, they processed this payroll as the first of 2024. Now, these were already high earners and these were large bonus amounts. So, the tax liabilities were very different with this payroll being processed the first of 2025 than they would have been had they been processed in 2024. So the client processed this payroll and Gusto debited for the tax liabilities according to it being the first payroll of the new year. They went back and canceled the payroll and reran it in the correct year. But now there were a lot of questions about the taxes and what went where and who was still owed what money. So we dug into this and basically we had to do a full 360 reconciliation showing the actual liabilities, what Gusto debited from the client, what Gusto paid to whom, and then log into each tax portal to reconcile what Gusto was showing they had paid versus what the state was showing they had received. So as you can imagine, this was a very large project, and there was more than $80,000 tied up in this mess. They had already been working with Gusto for a while trying to get this sorted out, but no one was really able to make heads or tails or decide how to move forward. So, if you're not familiar with Gusto's payroll system, it's designed for small business. It's pretty easy to use, but it has pretty limited reporting. And so, if you're familiar with their system, you might already know this, but if you go and look at their bank transaction report, it's not easy to figure out for each debit what they were debiting for. So you actually have to pull this report and then click into each transaction to see what makes up that total debit amount. And in the case of this payroll and this issue, there were a lot of debits that happened. This was multi-state. So basically I went in and I pulled all of the data, went through, looked at everything that was debited, what was paid. And so you have, with Gusto, what they debited from the client and what they paid to whom. And so you have a variance there. But then for each tax account, you also have to look at what was owed. Are the liabilities correctly reported? What are they showing as due? So this project in total involved me going in and amending multiple tax returns to reflect the correct wage information, figuring out who was still owed as far as the tax agencies, and then was it the client who needed to pay that money, or was it Gusto that was holding the funds? The IRS, the 941 tax payment, was much larger than it needed to be because it was paid as, the first payroll of the new year. These earners had already met the Social Security wage limit, so they weren't subject to Social Security or shouldn't have been. But of course, because it was ran as the first payroll of the new year, that tax was included. So there's just a lot of pluses and minuses going on. And I'm getting excited just thinking about it again. But it was very rewarding to be able to step in and dig into this data, get a full picture of what happened. So what happened, what should have happened, and how do we get, from what we did to what should have been done. Drafted a letter to the IRS on behalf of the client to have them move funds because they also had a very high penalty, I think $13,000, $30,000. It was not a small penalty, but they were now saying that their Q4 payment was late because they had this Q1 payment that was applied. So we had them move that payment back to the right pay date, liability date, which ended up being in excess of what was owed. So got those penalties removed. But again, over $80,000 was being tied up on top of penalties that we were able to have abated, tax amendments that needed to be processed. But overall, it's not just coming in and doing the work, but actually being able to explain the full picture to the client and also to Gusto. I was actually working behind the scenes with Gusto and provided them with my full reconciliation, which finally allowed them to get start getting that money refunded to the client. But, this client was just so overwhelmed by this giant tax issue, and their payroll company wasn't really able to come in and handle it for them. So they had to consult an outside resource, which was me. But these are the kinds of things I love doing because there aren't many people that really understand taxes, the different tax types, how it's calculated, how it affected the whole cost of payroll, the tax liability by being processed in January rather than December. What needs to be amended? Who do I need to talk to? How do I get into their tax accounts? POAs were involved. So, again, at the end of the day, it's just really neat to be able to use these skills that I've developed over the course of the last 14 years or so, and really come in and help these business owners when they're just at their wits' end and don't know where to turn and don't know what to do, and no one can give them answers, and we get to come in and fix that for them. So, all that being said, if you're still watching, you may have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's okay. Point being, if you are in a bit of a payroll conundrum and find yourself needing help, please feel free to reach out, especially if it's related to payroll taxes. We can come in, save the day, not only get everything back on track, but also work with you to make sure that you know what happened and that you're comfortable with the numbers. Because, as a business owner, it's really hard to sleep at night if you have a bunch of money tied up and you're not sure if you owe it or not, and no one can tell you, what's really owed to who. So if you're in a bit of a payroll conundrum or crisis, please feel free to reach out. You can always find us online at valorpayrollsolutions.com.